Okay, so now we're at question number 12 of the ACT English test. Let's begin. I'm going to read it as is. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, comma, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. Now that sounds fine the way it's written, but let's say we're not really sure which answer is right. And on top of that, we're short on time. Well, if that's the case, remember, we're going to use this concision and subvocalization technique. Concision means we find the shortest answer choice, the one with the least amount of words or the least amount of punctuation. Subvocalize it, hear how it sounds. If it sounds smooth, pick it. If not, find the next most concise answer. And this is going to work 80% of the time. Okay, so which one of these would be the most concise answer? Well, it would be J, right? Because it only has 2 words here. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, comma, but also growing up to be a confident young bull. Well, that sounds awkward, right? It doesn't sound like a complete thought. So if you're going to use this technique, you would have to move on to the next most concise answer, which would be which one? Right, that would have to be answer choice F. Okay, so let's read it as is. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, comma, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. Right, so that's the most concise answer that sounds the smoothest. So if you were running short on time, you would pick F and move on. And you know what? You would be right. Let's figure out why F is the right answer and why the other ones are not the right answer. The first thing we're going to want to look for are differences within each of these answers. And the first one here has grew. G is have grown, H is had grown, and J is growing. So I notice that these are different tenses, and the only way to know which tense I'm going to use is to read and find some clues. The first place you're going to want to read is the same sentence that this is in. Eli not only overcame his early limitations. Got it. So overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. So the first thing to recognize is that this is past tense. And what I'm looking for is another past tense phrase, which means that I have to figure out which one of these are past tense and which ones are not. Let's start with answer choice F. Now we know that one is the correct answer, and we also know that grew is past. And if you're not sure if it's past, present, or future, sometimes it's easier to put it into a sentence and hear how it sounds. He grew up to be tall. He grew up to be a lawyer. So grew up is past tense. And use it in a sentence, it makes sense. If I said he is growing, well, that would be present. He will grow, right? That would be future. Okay, so I want us to be aware of how to figure out if something's past, present, or future. And by using this in a sentence, I can see this is past. So if I'm confused on how to do that, I'll put it in a sentence, and hopefully that'll help me out. Now G, let's look at G. He also will have grown. So the trick here is looking at this word have and forget about the word grown. Is this have present, past, or future? Well, if I'm going to use it in a sentence, I have an ice cream cone versus I had an ice cream cone. Which one lets me know I have an ice cream cone currently? Well, that would be G. So this is going to be present. Present. Likewise with H, forget about the word grown. Let's look at the word had. I had an ice cream cone. So that would be past. I had one in the past. And what about growing? Well, that would be I am growing. So that would be present. Perfect. Okay, so because I'm looking for something in the past tense, I need to get rid of the ones that are in the present tense. I didn't really mark that off very well. There you go. And so I'm left with F and H. Now, how do we pick between these two, right? They're both past. And I need something that's past tense. Well, technically speaking, this had here makes it a past perfect. Past perfect. While this is just simple past. Now, you don't need to know the difference between past perfect and simple past, but for those of you that are interested, I'll show you right now. So here's a good example. I had finished dinner by the time he called me, right? Had, finished. Had indicates past, and also called. Called is past tense. Look at this timeline here. I finished dinner, right? Because it said I had finished dinner by the time he called me. Well, whenever we use past perfect, right? That's the one where we have the past tense word. Well, we had finished, right? But it said had here. Had indicates that this is going to be past perfect. It usually occurs before something occurred in the past. So that's when we would use it. So that is the subtle distinction between these two, between simple past and past perfect. On the ACT, you really don't need to know the difference between those two in that way. And because you don't need to know the difference between those two, they're not going to test you on the subtleties of the language. Instead, they just want you to recognize the form. And the form, that's where we're talking about parallelism, where we want to match the same form. And if you recall, parallel structures will sound smooth as opposed to sounding jarring, running and sliding versus running and to slide. In this case here, I'm going to go back to the test. To follow the same form, we don't want to have the word had here. If I said Eli not only had overcome his early limitations, but he also had grown up to be a confident young bull. Well, that would be similar in terms of form. But it didn't say the word had up front. It was a simple past. So I want the one that is simple past as well, or the one that sounds the most appropriate. Eli not only overcame his early limitations, but he also grew up to be a confident young bull. And that again is why F is correct and H would not be right, even though they both express something that happened in the past. Again, let's run through these. So the first thing that we did, if we're not really sure what to do, is to use our concision and subvocalization technique. When we used that, we started with J, eliminated it because it sounded awkward. We ended up with F because it was the most concise and sounded smooth. Then we went through the answer choices and figured out that really this is a question about verb tense. And the only way to figure out which verb tense is correct is by looking for clues in the sentence. We found a clue right here and realized that overcame was past tense, so we needed something else that was past tense in order to follow form. Now looking through these options, we recognized that two of them were present. One was present perfect. Again, you don't need to know the distinctions between them. And the other one was simple present. We got rid of those. And we ended up with F and H. We recognize that H, being past perfect, again, something you don't need to know, was not the same form as the past tense that was expressed earlier in the sentence. And we want something that has the same parallel structure, which means that it sounds the same, it sounds smooth. And that was answer choice F, because the test is not going to ask you to distinguish between simple past and past perfect in terms of timeline. They just want you to follow the same form and recognize which one sounds the most appropriate. Okay, thank you.